Welcome everyone to the fourth part in our Beyond Limits series, a deeper look at thinking. So as you were joining, we asked you to think about a strong feeling that you had about work this week and where it came from. The topic this week is, how do my thinking and feelings interact? So just to recap, my name is Kate here. I work helping people to feel and perform at their best and realise their infinite potential. So I have a team of 12 amazing coaches that work with me to help people have deep insights about their well-being and performance. We've already had a few parts and I'm going to recap these as we go through the session now. So I'll just take a few minutes to do this. So we looked at what is the role of my thinking when I feel and perform at my best. What is the invisible driver of my thinking? What do I need to know about stressful thinking? And in this part, how do my thinking and feelings interact? Now, thinking is at the root of everything we experience, and that's why it's so important to understand. So if we think back to the first part of the series, when we're at our best, when we're at our peak performance, we experience all of these things that we see on the screen. And that's innate. We don't have to work to be connected with people. When we're present, when we're feeling good, we naturally connect really well with other people. We're naturally resilient. So rather than having to think, how do I get all of these things? It's about, how do I understand what I need to let go so that I can get back to this natural state of peak performance? That was what the research showed. But if we look at some of the neuroscience research, what's happening in our brains when we're at our best, that supports that feeling. And a couple of the pieces of research from Csikszentmihalyi, who's the godfather of flow, he talks about how the self disappears. And we see that now in modern neuroscience because the executive part of our brain shuts down. So we're not thinking about ourselves, we lose that self-criticism. And we have that sense of effortlessness. So it feels really good. And actually, again, the neuroscience shows that when we're in a state of flow, our optimal state of consciousness, we flush out stress chemicals. So it's actually really good for us as well. So all of these things together just show that when we're at our best, we have that mental clarity. When we've got mental clarity, we do better in all aspects of our life, in our performance and our well-being. Then we went on to look at the invisible driver of my thinking. So we introduced you to the concept of state of mind. The fact that we have this invisible driver of our psychology, which is always just bobbing up and down. If we think about it going from 0 to 10, for example, 10 being huge perspective, balloons high in the sky, we can really see for miles and we have that clarity. And low being that we're on the ground, we're taking things personally, we're reactive. And of course, sometimes we're just around the 5, 6, 7, and maybe slightly lower. But what we need to know about that is our state of mind is going to hugely impact how we see the world. Because we are not seeing the world, we're seeing our state of mind's version of the world. So when we're at work, if things look difficult and there's silos and there's red tape and bureaucracy, then that's what we're going to see. Because if we have stressful thinking, we have stressful feeling. We're going to talk a bit more about that today. But we introduced this concept of our psychological immune system. So even in the midst of being very kind of stressed, we have moments where we have that clarity as well, where we let the snow settle in the globe and we can see the image better. And as we start to see that more and see that we have this amazing system that's going to help us feel well and perform well more of the time, then we can use it more effectively. And just to carry on the recap, we had Dr. Giles Croft talking to us about stress, and he shared this fun image that he'd found online, and just talking about the myths that you need to bust when we're thinking about stress, because there's old research that showed that we need a little bit of stress or arousal, as it used to be called, which would just make us start to have that energy and momentum. But physical stress is not the same as mental stress. Mental stress is not good for us ever. It really isn't good for us. And we do great when we're not stressed mentally. So, it's great for us to be laid back, and that's when we will have more capacity for our resourcefulness and we'll feel better. And it's actually a really good place to be. But he shared a lovely quote from Richard Carlson, which was, "Our current level of stress will be exactly that of our tolerance to stress." So really helping to bring to life the fact that stress isn't a disease, stress is a product of our thinking. And so we will always have stress levels that equal our tolerance to stress. So, if we've got quite a low tolerance to stress, we'll reach that much more quickly. But we have to know that it's made up and that we're always going to be thinking it. And the challenges, whether they're at home or at work, they're not going anywhere. And we can see them as challenges, or we can see them as opportunities, or we can just not create any story or narrative around them as well. So what are we hoping to give you in this mini series? So when we see things differently, we do things differently. Here's a quote from someone who went on the Beyond Limits program. So we're giving you some content here to really help you in your personal development and help you feel and perform better. But from a personal and a professional perspective, I found the insights that I've gained from the program to be extremely useful and equally applicable to my everyday life and in the management of my team. And of course, because we're thinking beings and thinking is universal, and the better we get at understanding our thinking, the better we're going to be in all areas of our life. So that's where we got to first of all, in the first 3 parts of this series. But now I want to spend some time looking at, again, how the mind works, and then what does it look like in our jobs and in our working life. So we talked before about bringing people onto this program to show that we're swimming in thoughts. And just like a fish can't see the water that it's swimming in, we often don't realize how much we're living in a thought-created reality. But why is thought so hard to see? Well, it's hard to see because it becomes our reality. So whatever we think becomes our perception. Coming back to that Mara Gleason quote, we're seeing our state of mind's projection of the world. So it feels so real and so seamless, and we're living in this thought-created reality that it's hard for us to actually see that that is what's happening. But another way to think about this is our mind is like a projector. So we are not seeing the world objectively. We never do. We're always seeing our state of mind's version of the world. So this just brings us back to a classic reminder that the mind creates our experience from the inside out 100% of the time. And this is actually very freeing for us when we think about stress at work. So when we think, oh, I feel really stressed at work, a small shift in perception can have an enormous impact on both our well-being and our performance and what we do about it. Because nothing outside of us has any inherent meaning in and of itself. What is out there is sensory data that we give meaning to using thoughts. And that's interesting, isn't it? So you only have to look at things where 2 people see the same thing differently, or maybe you see the same thing differently on a different occasion. Maybe sometimes your manager comes in and they don't say hello straight away, and you think, oh, that's rude. How come they didn't say that? If you're in a lower state of mind, and in a higher state of mind, maybe think, oh, that's unusual. I wonder if they're okay. So we see the same things differently. But in the same way, we see we're looking at something and our mind is always trying to create meaning. The psychologist Kelly, he used to say that everyone is a miniature psychologist. We're always looking at things and trying to make sense of it. But because of that, we get ourselves into difficulties. There's actually a study that looked at the left versus the right brain that we have and the roles that they play in helping create meaning. So this was people that had to have the link severed between the right and the left brain in order to stop the epilepsy. But it gave a unique opportunity to show the left brain a story and ask what was going to happen, and do the same with the right brain. Now, the left part of our brain, it has language, but it also has all of these things: stories and judgment and comparison and categorization and interpretation. So it acts as an interpreter, but that doesn't mean that it gets it all right. It just means it's going to draw on what it knows and what it's got access to try and make sense of the world. So what they found in this experiment was that when they showed pictures to the right-hand brain and got asked them to talk about what they were seeing. They got the correct answer, but because language doesn't come from the right part of our brain, then it's not always expressed in the right way, whereas the left brain could express something, but it really wasn't correct. So this just goes to show that biologically, we know that we can't always trust our thinking. Our thinking is a machine doing what a machine does, but it doesn't always mean that it's right. So it makes sense to stop and think, is this true? And how much should I be trusting it? But let's bring this into the work context now, because I think that's really important. So let's assume you've been invited to a meeting, and I want you to just take a moment and think about these scenarios now. What's coming up for you as I say these things? So imagine that your manager has invited you to a meeting, but the email says, I'd like to discuss something with you. Could you meet me? What would you be thinking and feeling then? Or what about if your manager said, I heard there've been some issues with this client, can we have a talk about it? Or maybe your manager says, we've been looking for ways to save costs in the team, and I'd like to run some ideas past you. Or maybe even one, I'm really sorry, I'm not well. I'm going to need you to lead the meeting that's about to happen in 30 minutes time. So what would your thinking be? What would your feeling be? You know, your reaction would depend on your past experience, most likely, because that's where we go to. We look at, have I been in this situation before? And we think that's going to help us with the situation going forward. But really, the best thing that we can do is just stay really neutral and open and curious in those situations, because as soon as we let the stories start getting animated, we can live in a real story of fear. And I'll give you an example. It's actually an out of work example, but I'm an identical twin, and I take part in twin research quite often with my twin. And sometimes it's biological and sometimes it's psychological. So we were having some tests done at the hospital. I had an ECG on my heart, and they said, there's an irregularity in the test. You're going to have to see an expert. Now that happened quite quickly, but I had a couple of weeks thinking, oh my goodness, it's an irregularity. What could this mean? How could this be happening? You know, how long do I have to live? Of course, I saw the expert and they said, no, it's absolutely fine. And then it all melted away. So it just shows all of that story. It looks well-intentioned. It looks like it makes sense, but it really was just kind of distorted thinking, creating stories about what this could or couldn't mean. So it's a real example to me about the power of our thinking. But we are designed to experience what we think in the moment. And that's why, as soon as if I say to you, imagine you're paddling in the sea on a faraway beach, you'll all have this sense of this image in your mind. So we're designed to experience what we think in the moment. So when we're at work, if we start thinking that things are hard and difficult and how will I get through it, and everyone is stressed, then of course that's what we start to experience in the moment. And that is taking us away from our peak performance rather than helping us think creatively and find resources to overcome it. So where does it start? Let's explore why we start to think the world out there makes me feel like this. You know, and we can remember, can't we? It starts when we're children. So it starts when we're small, and maybe you've got small children, or you just remember yourself that you might have a period of being a bit insecure, you're a bit stressed, and mum or dad might say to you that here's the teddy bear for you. And if you've got children, and I know people say like, oh, we've got to have 3 of the same bears, because if that bear goes missing, you know, they really become insecure. But then actually, if you give it a bit more time, you realize that the state of mind will change on its own. But it's the first lesson that we have, is that this bear makes this person feel okay. And then we just continue that to adulthood, but we swap the teddy bear then for these other things, the car and the promotion and the house and the family, and I can only be okay when, or I will feel good when. But ultimately, people are just looking for a good feeling. And that's why we think, oh, if I achieve this, then I can relax a bit. But of course, that's always short-lived. Even people that have written books, they say as soon as their book's published, they actually become quite fearful about the reaction and everything else. You know, it's so short-lived because that isn't where our good feeling comes from. Our good feeling is always internal. In fact, the search for good feeling, rather than just enjoying the moment and having that kind of gratitude in the moment, takes us away from our good feeling. So this is part of it. We just have to understand that our experiences, our thoughts and our feelings together, emotions and feelings, they are the shadow of thoughts. You know, they don't come on their own. They come because of the thinking that we have about certain things. And I know this, I see this quite regularly sometimes when I talk to people that have been made redundant. And people can have hugely different reactions to that. Some people can say, oh, how am I going to cope? You know, I'm taking it really personally. Why me? Why not someone else? And other people I've spoken to when they got made redundant, they just say, brilliant, I wanted to leave anyway. I hope this would happen. This is going to give me a chance to make a clean break. So we can see there the same things happening, but the thinking's completely different. Because the thinking's different, the feeling's different. So this is what we really need to learn. Thought and feeling, they're the same coin. They're just different sides of the same coin. They're always linked. And when we know that, and we understand about other people as well, we know when someone is in bad feeling, it's about their thinking. Yeah, it's not about us. And when we can make that distinction, we really understand it, that gives us a huge buffer against our own stress, and it promotes our well-being because we know it isn't about us. So the more we can stay neutral and help people get back to that place of neutral themselves so that they can get back into, you know, clear thinking, positive feeling, then that's going to be more helpful for them. So Byron Katie is someone that we often talk to when we're thinking about what do you do about this? How do you understand this even deeper? And here's a nice quote. A thought is harmless unless we believe it. It is not our thoughts, but the attachment to our thoughts that causes suffering. Attaching to a thought means that it isn't true without inquiring. A belief is a thought that we've been attaching to often for years. So she has some fantastic resources as well. So really encourage you to have a look at the work and what that means as well, because we see that thinking is natural, thinking is universal, but when we become attached to a certain thoughts about the way something should be, that's where the suffering comes from. So here's how you can start to apply this at home. You know, start to look at your thinking and start to see a situation. So if you have any kind of reaction to something, think about where does it come from? So the outside in perspective would be, I feel like this because, my boss said that, or the company did this. The inside out perspective is my interpretation of that action was X, and this means that I now feel like this. It could be, because the outside in looks like because I wasn't included in this meeting, now I feel excluded. But the inside out truth is that when I looked at that, I immediately had the thought, why haven't I been included? And that is what created that negative feeling. Now that in and of itself isn't bad, but if we know that, all we need to do is talk to our boss and maybe just clarify and say, oh, I wasn't included in the meeting. And perhaps, as it often is, these things are a misunderstanding. But at least it gives you a chance to just talk kind of calmly and rationally and find out things for yourself. So coming to the end of it, we want to take weight off the mind. We know that when we have less on our mind, we do better. When we slow down, we've got more space for ideas, more space for creativity. It feels lighter and it feels more enjoyable. It's what's going to help us get back to our peak performance. Remember, we talk about getting back. We don't need to do anything to get here. This is our natural state. We're naturally creative, connected, with clarity and resilience and well-being and all of these good things, but it just gets covered up by our thinking. So remember that when we're at our best, it should feel effortless. If you feel like it's a real struggle at the moment, then it's a sign that you're not at your best. It's a sign that you need a break. And that's, find something that you want to do, that you enjoy, that will be fulfilling or be in service to others, because all of those things help as well. The self disappear, give our state of mind a chance to lift back up, and that will have an ongoing impact into what we're thinking and what we're feeling. Because skills and techniques are crucial, but mental clarity is always the deciding factor in our performance. So start to see it for yourself. Start to see how, even if you're stressed, there'll be pockets where you feel fine. Yeah, maybe you see a funny meme, and then that takes you out of your stress for a moment, and you realize you forgot it, because it's always there under the surface. And the more we can get back to that clarity, that being neutral, that having that perspective, the better outcomes we're going to have. So that is the end of our mini series. So a whole look at thinking, different aspects of our thinking, how it impacts us at work and at home. Again, our thinking is human, it's universal, so it's not limited to work, but we know that people do a lot better when they have this understanding. So question your thinking and your strong negative feelings. You know, is it true? Use this to let go, take a break, and come back to neutral. We would love to hear how you get on with using these techniques. Feel free to contact us for more one-to-one coaching and workshops. You know, we see a huge impact from the programs that we run. This can be for you or your teams or your organization. So I really do encourage you to come and follow up with me in the future. But this was just a taster of our Beyond Limits program, just showing some of the core foundational aspects if we really want to achieve our peak well-being and performance more of the time. Now, this is a new paradigm. This is a completely different way of thinking about it, letting go rather than doing more. And if it's interested you and you want to explore more, then please get in touch. We would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for your time. Spread the word and take care. Bye-bye.